What was the most F-up thing you saw at your school? Story 1. Some kids were punching a mason jar lid that we used to seal a jar with some bug in it. They were doing it as some sort of who's tougher test. When the teacher sees this and sees they have small scratches on their knuckles, she proceeds to tell them that the big was poisonous and they will die very soon since they drew blood punching the lid. We were maybe 10 at the time. She made them write goodbye notes to their parents and make goodbye speeches to class. We were all tripping because we believed her too. It was wild. Story 2. A kid at our school died once while out on a school camp. They were way out in the Australian outback. The teachers made barbecue for the kids, and one of the boys, for some reason, ate the food kebabs without asking what was in them, even though his parents had filled out his permission form indicating clearly that he had. Food-allergies.long-story-short. Hardcore anaphylaxis, throat swelled shut. Fell to the ground, foaming. School nurse stabbed him with every single EpiPen they had in the medical kit. Nothing. Nada. Zip. F all happened, picked him up, threw him in the van, and sped out of the campsite at top speed down the road. They were so far out in the middle of nowhere that there's no phone reception. Can't do anything. Can't call for an ambulance, helicopter, nothing. Finally got to the nearest town, called emergency services. Helicopter arrived, loaded the kid onto it, started treatment. Flew straight back to town. Never made it, dead before the chopper landed. I was working at the school at the time. I had a job offered by the school to graduates, which I accepted and found out all the details from the school nurse. Story 3. The bullied kid other than myself. Absolutely losing his goddamn mind and beating the hell out of his bully. There was blood everywhere, mostly on the kid. He was punching, he was kicking. He was slamming his head against a bench, he bit part of his ear off. No lying, he almost killed him. Broke several ribs, several fingers, his ankle, jaw. Apparently he had a ton of mental health issues, and deliberately stopped taking his meds just so he was unhinged enough to do that to the bully. People talked about it for years after it happened. A buddy of mine became a teacher there. It still apparently gets mentioned. It's like a folktale over 18 years later. Story 4. A new kid at our school grabbed the art teacher's scissors and threw them over a dividing wall when the teacher left the room. They hit some girl in a different art class on the other side and one of the blades went through her cheek. We were held after class until he finally confessed and we saw the police at the school later. He had been at our school for about a week, and we never saw him again after that day. Story 5. Bright and early in the morning as many kids are arriving to school. Pretty popular guy comes running through the crowd, chased by a group of 3 other dudes. A little bit of space opens up for them to run through, but all of a sudden one of the chasers stops, pulls out a gun, and fires 3 right into his back. Murdered right in front of a significant chunk of students. Very sad day. Story 6. Middle school. Girl had the sewing machine needle go right through her finger. The left with the needle and thread just hanging out. Another kid had an X-Acto knife stabbed right into his wrist by accident, so close to the artery. High school. Girl was run over by a bus. It backed over her, then pulled forward over her again. We had fundraisers and pep rallies for her. She made a full recovery and is still playing sports at almost 40 now. S in the bathroom. Endangered turtle was found during construction. All construction had to stop until the turtle moved out. P teacher. You know how that one goes. Story 7. A kid tried to kill himself by jumping off the bridge in the school and it was only like a 25-foot drop so it didn't work and everyone laughed at him. He killed himself a few years after graduation. You guys, I am less than 5 feet tall and I have a hard time telling how tall things are. It could have been anywhere from 10 to 25 feet, it just looked very far to me, but again I am for 10. Story 8. In grade 2 my teacher made all students step on a child as they walked into class because he left his lunchbox on the steps in front of the class. This child was mixed race, and this was in the 80s and in apartheid South Africa. Those who refused got hit with a cane for not listening to their teacher. Supremely messed up, and I will never forget it. She was fired a year or two later for various messed up things. Story 9. In 1981 I was in grade 4 and we had a sadistic teacher. She'd beat us for any reason. The worst I saw were two incidents. The first was when she caned a boy on his palm. She thrashed his hand until the skin broke and blood gushed out. The second was when she called a boy up to the blackboard to solve a maths problems. Poor boy was so terrified he froze. She grabbed him by the neck and smashed his head against the blackboard several times. She regularly did this to him, and eventually he ended up in hospital with a serious concussion. She taught there for many years and no one ever did anything about her. This was in South Africa, and back then teachers were considered untouchable by most parents. If you came home complaining that a teacher hit you, you'd probably get another thrashing because the teacher was always right. She's dead by now and I hope she's burning in the deepest reaches of hell. Story 10. My gym teacher also taught health education. He would sit at the front of the class in his mesh shorts and no boxers and teach us about education. His D would sometimes be visible. We had a class of 40 boys and 6 girls, and apparently us girls were pretty naive cause. We all brushed it off as an repetitive accident. In hindsight, as an adult, that asshole was showing his pee to teenagers on purpose, and we were all too dumb and scared to realize he was real handsy in gym. It's not the worst story, but still super gross. Story 11. At an assembly in the auditorium, there was some kind of raffle. The kid who won was gay. Maybe one out of the 5 or so openly gay kids in my school of 500 plus students. All of those kids were bullied and made fun of for being gay. Anyway, when they called his name and he came up on stage, it seemed like practically the entire auditorium was booing him. He went up, grabbed whatever it was he won, and flipped the middle finger to everybody in the room. He got suspended for that. This would have been around August 9th. Story 12. Some guy in college sat in front of me in the studio. We were on stools, so there was no back to the chair. He had his phone in his back pocket, screen facing out, with rough porn playing on his phone. He had his headphones on. I wasn't the only one who noticed, but I certainly didn't want to break the silence by telling him. Story 13. This seriously terrible girl who always smelled bad and screamed at people that she was a witch and she'd curse you kept bugging my buddy to sell hers Ritalin. He told her no a whole bunch of times, but finally about a week before the school year ended he needed money for something and finally agreed. She immediately went to the administration, who called the police, and he was both expelled and ended up in juvie. As far as I know, she's still an insufferable piece of trash almost 30 years later. Story 14. One saw a teacher fully dump out a teenage girl's bag because he was convinced she stole one of his pens, exposing her pads, tampons, phone, hairbrush, etc. Also her diary, which some random kid picked up and started reading out loud while laughing, exposing her life at home where her mom and dad are mentally abusive towards her. All the kids made fun of her and the teacher was just screaming her about a freaking pen. She ran out, and about 20 minutes later the teacher found the pen under his papers. She transferred schools. Story 15. When I was a senior, I went to one of the trashiest schools in my state. Some real redneck pride kinda stuff. There were 2 freshmen, total boners, but they were tough shit apparently. I remember it was the day before homecoming. They lured one of the special education kids into the boys' restroom and barricaded the door. They proceeded to beat the ever-living shit out of this kid and take pictures of each other, forcing a barely conscious far-spectrum autistic kid to fell at them. This part one didn't see, of course. What I did witness was after school. I got benched in football for smoking weed, so coach made me help coach freshmen so I wouldn't feel left out or useless. The freshmen practiced on a different field that got a great view of the parking lot. The victim had already been taken away and the 2 other kids were being questioned at the school. This was probably an hour after school let out. An officer came out with an off the attackers and was walking him across the pavilion. From the other side, another person, huge dude, got out of their car and started walking towards the officer and then one attacker. When they finally crossed paths, the huge guy gets one hit at the kid, knocking him down immediately, then dropped another first while the kid was flat against the concrete. Turned out the big guy was the autistic kid's dad, and nobody ever saw the one attacker again. There were a couple rumors spreading. Some said the kid was killed by the second punch, and other people were saying that impact scrambled his brains. The other attacker I couldn't tell you, nobody cared enough about him to start any rumors or spread any news. Story 16. I had a psych professor who just disappeared in the middle of the semester. We came to class and someone new walked in and said they were asked to sub for us that day, but they had no idea why. Ended up subbing the rest of the semester. Turns out some students who followed his Instagram saw that he had finally proposed to his girlfriend of like 10 years and they presumably just up and left together. He was always telling us about how he'd been wanting to do it, but didn't have the guts to. So kind of weird, but I guess it turned out okay for everyone. And we were all just proud of him. Story 17. Back in 3rd grade 1997, a classmate of mine was acting out. I'm not sure if our teacher was in a bad mood or this was accepted behavior back in the day, but he made the troubled student come up the front of the classroom. He then grabbed this kid by neck, pinned him against the wall, and proceeded to lift him up off the ground as high as he could. I don't remember exactly what was said, but I do remember our teacher saying, "I could kill you if I wanted to, but not today," as he dropped him. Story 18. When I was in college, there was a bomb scare. FBI was called on campus and everything. I still had a chemistry lab get to, even though the building in which the class was located was directly next to a building which had been evacuated and be firmly behind the yellow police tape. There was a stream of students passing this police tape and entering a back door held open by Ta to this building for classes. I joined the line and went to class. To this day I cannot fathom what I or anyone else was thinking in that moment. Story 19. There was a car accident in front of my school. 3 kids in the class below me got hit at 95 miles and the woman who hit them survived. 1 student died on impact, another died when they got to the hospital. The 3rd survived but was in a coma for the rest of the year. When he woke up he asked where they both were. Doctors had to lie to him about their whereabouts until his body was strong enough and the bleeding in his brain stopped. The woman got no jail time and the whole town went crazy. 2 weeks before that my best friend got shot in the face and died. We had constant therapist at the school and the road was closed until they could finally wash away all the blood. It's been for years and a lot of us still can't go where the crash happened without breaking down. That road before it becomes a school zone, it's 35 miles per hour. Who knows what was happening with her and how she got off free for killing 2 amazing kids. Story 20. This assault happened in the lunchroom and the principal swept it under the rug and tried to cover it up. Then there were about 3 riots in the school. Everything got put under control at an assembly. She didn't admit to sweeping it under the rug. In fact, she didn't even acknowledge it happened even though it was brought to her attention. She just paid attention to the riots, disregarding their meaning, and no, the girl who was assaulted never got any justice. I think she transferred schools. Story 21. I attended a boarding school in Nigeria where the older boys bullied the younger boys on a nightly basis. They would come and take one boy, strap him to a pole like a deer and carry him down to their dorm. The boys were more terrified of being taken than they were of what was actually going to happen. Once at their dorm, they would torment the poor kid for hours, but it was mostly stupid stuff, not any real physical harm. Nonetheless, many of the kids that came out of that school were seriously F up.